If you do anything wrong in your life, and I find out about it, I'm gonna try to take everything away from you. And I don't care what.
1 moment, 3 seconds, and nothing in Hollywood was ever the same. The night Will Smith walked across that Oscar stage and struck Chris Rock in front of the entire world, most people called it a scandal, a headline, something that would trend for a week and quietly disappear, the way Hollywood buries everything it's ashamed of. They were wrong. 3 years later, the shockwave is still moving. Two of the most fearless, most unsilenceable comedians alive, Katt and Dave Chappelle, have made absolutely certain it never stops. This is the story of the slap that lit a fuse and the men who refused to let it go out. Stay locked in, because by the time this is over, you will never look at Will Smith, Hollywood, or the entire comedy industry the same way again. Before we talk about the men who refused to let this story die, we have to understand what they were responding to. Not just the slap, what the slap revealed. March 27th, 2022. Dolby Theater, Hollywood. A live television audience of more than 15 million people. Chris Rock, a working comedian doing his job, made a mild G.I. Jane reference about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head. A joke under 5 seconds. About a medical condition Jada had openly discussed herself. The audience barely flinched. Will Smith laughed, and then something shifted. What happened next violated every unspoken rule Hollywood runs on. Will Smith stood up. He crossed that stage, and he hit a man who was holding nothing but a microphone. The violence was real. The crack of palm against face was audible through the theater's sound system. Chris Rock stumbled, visibly stunned, suspended for a terrible half-second between thinking this was a bit and understanding it was assault. It wasn't a bit. Here's where the story detonates. Nothing happened. Security didn't move, the Academy didn't act, no one removed Will Smith from the building. Instead, less than 40 minutes later, he stood at that same podium, accepted the Oscar for Best Actor, and received a standing ovation from the very room that had just watched him attack one of its own. He wept. He invoked love. He invoked God. He invoked destiny. The audience clapped. Let that breathe for a moment, because it wasn't the slap that turned this into a cultural catastrophe. It was the applause. The slap was a man losing control. The standing ovation was an entire industry choosing to reward him for it.
People are here and screaming and cheering. People screaming your name, that makes you feel really good.
Comedians didn't need to debate it. They understood immediately what the rest of the world was still processing. Chris Rock had done nothing wrong. He'd done his job and been physically punished for it in front of the entire world. While the institution supposedly dedicated to celebrating cinema handed his attacker its highest honor. The comedy community responded. Jim Carrey went on CBS Mornings and called Hollywood's standing ovation the most spineless moment he had ever witnessed in the industry's history. He said it plainly, you do not have the right to walk onto a stage and hit someone because they said words. Bill Maher pointed out the obvious. Alopecia is not a terminal illness. Publicly discussing a medical condition does not authorize physical violence against the person who references it. Across the board, comedians drew the same line. Words and violence are not equivalent. Offense and assault are not the same thing. But two men in particular went further than all of them. Dave Chappelle and later Katt didn't just defend Chris Rock. They went straight for the rot underneath.
Yeah, you can't buy chemistry and you can't fake it. You either vibe somebody.
5 weeks. That's how long it took. 5 weeks after Will Smith walked off that stage with his Oscar and his standing ovation, Dave Chappelle was performing at the Hollywood Bowl, part of Netflix's comedy festival, when a 23-year-old named Isaiah Lee rushed the stage. Armed. A replica gun fitted with a folding knife blade, He tackled Chappelle to the ground in front of thousands. Security intervened. Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes helped drag the attacker away. Chappelle was shaken, but unhurt. Now stop. Think about that sequence. Will Smith slaps Chris Rock on March 27th. 40 minutes later, standing ovation. 5 weeks later, someone rushes a stage with a weapon. Comedy Club owner Danny Zoldan said it directly. Before the Will Smith incident, there was an invisible fence around performers. People didn't cross it. After the slap, she predicted it would happen again. Will Smith had broken a barrier, made violence against comedians feel accessible, even acceptable. The copycat effect wasn't theoretical. It had already arrived. But Chappelle's response? It became a defining moment in modern comedy history. 2 days after being tackled with a weapon, he performed a secret show at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. Chris Rock joined him on stage. 2 men who had both been physically attacked within weeks of each other, standing together, doing the only thing comedians know how to do. They turned it into comedy. Chappelle joked that at least Chris got slapped by someone of repute. He himself had been tackled by a guy with leaves in his hair. Chris Rock's response? Simple, clean, devastating. He said Chappelle had been attacked by the softest person who ever rapped. The room erupted. But it was more than a punchline. It was a surgical strike. Chris wasn't calling Will Smith dangerous. He was calling him fake, soft, performative. A man whose tough guy moment at the Oscars was the greatest reveal of the emptiness underneath. The Fresh Prince, the blockbuster hero, the devoted family man. All shattered, not by being too hard, by proving he was hollow.
Years.
Opening up, and it's one of the places in the region that is, we call film friendly.
And I would never play an arena before I saw you do it. You made me dream bigger, and you're younger than me.
Dave Chappelle's response didn't stay in the comedy lane. It went somewhere far more uncomfortable, far more honest. At the joint tour he and Chris Rock launched in September 2022, opening night at Liverpool's M&S Bank Arena, Chappelle took the stage and said something that cut deeper than any punchline. He said people forget who Will Smith is. That 10 minutes before winning the biggest award of his career, Will acted like he was still back in West Philadelphia. Think about what Chappelle was pointing to. Fame doesn't change who you fundamentally are. It just gives you better lighting. Then he said this, and read it carefully. Will did the impression of a perfect person for 30 years. And then he ripped his mask off and showed us he was as ugly as the rest of us. Chappelle wasn't condemning Will Smith. He was doing something far more complicated. He was humanizing him while still holding him accountable. He was saying the real Will was always in there. The rage, the dysfunction, the unresolved wounds. Hollywood let him hide it for 3 decades because it was more profitable to have America's favorite movie star stay charming. The Oscars night wasn't an aberration. It was a revelation. And then Chappelle said something that stopped the room. He hoped Will Smith would not put the mask back on. He genuinely hoped Will would let his real face breathe. Is that compassion? Is that condemnation? It's both. Chappelle was telling Will Smith in front of thousands of people in a moment that would circle the world. Everything you've built is a performance, and we can all see that now. When The Dreamer dropped on Netflix New Year's Eve 2023, Chappelle returned to the incident with even more detail. He revealed he'd called Chris Rock on FaceTime about 30 minutes after the Oscars, and Chris picked up. He told Chappelle he was the only person he'd answered for, with the entire world flooding his phone. Hollywood's most powerful figures, media, everyone. Chris Rock picked up for one person, a fellow comedian. Someone who understood the violation without needing to make him a spectacle. Think about what that says about who matters when the cameras go dark. If this story is getting to you, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Do you think Chappelle was being compassionate, or was he burying Will Smith with kindness? I want to know what you think.
Watching a river, or a beautiful sunset, just something natural, beautifully untouched by reaction to this.
If Dave Chappelle was a scalpel, Katt Williams arrived with a flamethrower. For years, Katt had existed outside the Hollywood machine, in ways Will Smith never did. Where Will was industry royalty, box office gold, Academy approved, safe, Katt Williams built his career as a deliberate outsider. A man who burned bridges on purpose, who said what no one else would say, who was dismissed, written off, and dragged through tabloid humiliation for years. And then something extraordinary happened. In his landmark interview on Shannon Sharpe's Club Shay Shay podcast, Katt Williams didn't just discuss Will Smith. He systematically dismantled the mythology of Hollywood celebrity in a way that connected directly to everything the Oscar slap had already cracked open. He named names. He provided context. He made accusations that were specific, detailed, and delivered with the calm confidence of a man who had been waiting years to be believed. But what made Katt's intervention so devastating was how he contextualized it. He wasn't talking about one bad night. He was describing a system, a Hollywood power structure that protects certain people, silences others, and decides in advance who gets to be a star and what they have to give up in exchange. And Will Smith, in Katt's telling, was not a victim of that system. He was at various points one of its most willing participants. The interview became one of the most watched in recent memory, because Katt Williams was saying things that people had whispered about for years, but could never get anyone famous enough to say publicly. He drew a direct line between the carefully managed image Will Smith had maintained for decades, the mask Chappelle described, and the explosion that happened on that Oscar stage. Katt Williams was describing how that mask gets made, who makes it, and what it costs. If two of the most fearless voices in comedy are both saying this, one with surgical philosophical precision, one with raw, documented specificity, what does that tell you about everything Will Smith spent 30 years trying to make you believe?